My sister decided to sell the inheritance that rightfully belonged to me in order to pay for her wedding, without even asking for my opinion. The betrayal and lack of consideration were so overwhelming that I couldn't stay silent in the face of such injustice. As a response, I took a drastic step. I canceled the wedding buffet. The law office of Henderson and Associates smelled of old leather and expensive coffee, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost with the stroke of a pen. Meredith Campbell sat rigidly in the burgundy leather chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she watched the elderly attorney adjust his wire-rimmed glasses. Across from her, her younger sister Sophia lounged with practiced elegance, her manicured nails drumming impatiently against her designer purse. "Ladies," Mr. Henderson began, his voice carrying the weight of years spent delivering both good and devastating news. "Thank you for coming today. As you know, we're here to discuss the final will and testament of your grandmother, Eleanor Margaret Whitmore." Meredith's throat tightened at the mention of Grandma Eleanor's full name. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral, 3 weeks since she'd stood in the rain watching them lower the woman who'd raised her into the ground. Their parents had died in a car accident when Meredith was 12 and Sophia was 8, leaving them in the care of their father's mother, a woman who'd never quite recovered from losing her only son. "The bulk of Mrs. Whitmore's estate," Henderson continued, shuffling through the papers before him, "including the house on Maple Street and her savings account, is to be divided equally between her 2 granddaughters." He paused, looking directly at Meredith. "However, there is a specific bequest that Mrs. Whitmore wanted to address separately." Sophia straightened in her chair, her green eyes sharpening with interest. "What kind of specific bequest?" Henderson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore's jewelry collection, including the family heirloom pieces that have been passed down through 4 generations, is to go entirely to Meredith Campbell." The silence that followed was deafening. Meredith felt her heart skip a beat, not from joy, but from the immediate tension that filled the room. She could feel Sophia's stare burning into the side of her face. "I'm sorry, what?" Sophia's voice had taken on that dangerously sweet tone that Meredith knew all too well. "The entire jewelry collection? To just Meredith?" "Yes, Miss Whitmore. Your grandmother was very specific about this." Henderson pulled out another document. "She left a letter explaining her decision if you'd like me to read it." "Please do," Sophia said through gritted teeth. Henderson unfolded the cream-colored stationery, and Meredith recognized her grandmother's spidery handwriting immediately. "My dearest girls," he read aloud, "I know this decision may seem unfair to some, but I have given it much thought. The Whitmore jewelry collection represents 4 generations of strong women who knew the value of perseverance and quiet strength. Meredith has always reminded me of these women, of my own mother, who survived the Depression with grace, and of my grandmother, who crossed an ocean with nothing but hope and determination." Meredith's eyes filled with tears as Henderson continued. "Sophia, my darling, you have many gifts, beauty, charm, and the ability to light up any room you enter. But Meredith has something different. She has the steady heart that our family treasures require. She will understand their true worth, not just their monetary value, but their emotional significance. She will care for them as I have, and as my mother did before me." The letter went on to detail specific pieces: the Victorian emerald necklace that great-great-grandmother Catherine had worn to her wedding in 1887, the Art Deco diamond bracelet that had been a gift from Meredith's great-grandfather, the sapphire earrings that had belonged to Eleanor's own mother. Each piece came with a story, a piece of family history that Meredith had heard countless times during long afternoons in her grandmother's sitting room. When Henderson finished reading, Sophia was white-faced with fury. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. Grandma Eleanor was clearly not thinking straight in her final years. "I mean, look at Meredith. When has she ever even worn jewelry? She dresses like a librarian." "Sophia," Meredith said quietly, but her sister cut her off. "No, Meredith. This is insane. Do you have any idea what that collection is worth? The emerald necklace alone was appraised at over $50,000 5 years ago. And you're going to what? Lock it all away in a safe deposit box because you're too scared to wear it?" Henderson cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ladies, I understand this is emotional, but the will is quite clear and legally binding. Mrs. Whitmore was of sound mind when she made these decisions. I can assure you of that. Meredith finally found her voice. Sophia, I had no idea this was what Grandma Eleanor planned. If you want to discuss— Oh, spare me! Sophia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. Of course you didn't know. Perfect little Meredith, always so humble, so deserving. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, congratulations. I hope you and your precious jewels are very happy together. She stormed out, leaving Meredith sitting alone with the attorney in uncomfortable silence. Through the tall windows, she could see Sophia on the sidewalk, already on her phone, gesticulating wildly as she spoke to someone. Miss Campbell, Henderson said gently, I know this is difficult. Family disputes over inheritances are unfortunately common, but your grandmother thought very carefully about her decisions. Meredith nodded, still processing what had just happened. Mr. Henderson, could you tell me more about the appraisal? I mean, I knew the pieces were valuable, but $50,000 for just one necklace? Oh, my dear, that's just the beginning. When your grandmother had the full collection appraised for insurance purposes 2 years ago, the total value was estimated at just over $300,000. Some of those pieces are museum quality. The number hit Meredith like a physical blow. $300,000. No wonder Sophia was furious. That was more than Meredith made in 5 years as a social worker. Over the next few days, Meredith tried repeatedly to reach out to her sister. She called, texted, even showed up at Sophia's upscale apartment in downtown Charleston. But her sister refused to see her. Finally, Sophia's roommate, a sweet girl named Kelly, answered the door with an apologetic expression. Meredith, I'm so sorry, but Sophia made me promise not to let you in. She's really upset about the whole inheritance thing. I understand, Meredith said, though her heart was breaking. Could you just tell her that I want to talk? That maybe we can work something out? Kelly nodded sympathetically. I'll try, but you know how Sophia gets when she's mad. Meredith did know. Sophia had always been dramatic, prone to intense emotions and grand gestures. As children, she'd been the one throwing tantrums when she didn't get her way, while Meredith had been the peacekeeper, always trying to smooth things over. It was a pattern that had continued well into their adult lives. But this felt different. This felt permanent. A week later, Meredith was organizing her grandmother's house when she found the jewelry collection in the master bedroom's walk-in closet. It was stored in an antique mahogany jewelry box that had belonged to Eleanor's mother, each piece carefully wrapped in tissue paper and arranged with meticulous care. As she unwrapped each item, Meredith was overwhelmed by memories. Here was the pearl necklace that Eleanor had worn to Meredith's college graduation. Here were the diamond studs that had sparkled in the church light during midnight Christmas masses. Each piece told a story, held a memory, connected her to generations of strong women who had loved and lost and persevered. She understood now why her grandmother had left them to her. It wasn't about favoritism or monetary value. It was about understanding. Sophia saw beautiful, expensive objects. Meredith saw family history, stories of resilience and love that transcended their material worth. But understanding didn't make the rift with her sister any easier to bear. 3 days later, Sophia finally called. Her voice was different, lighter, excited, almost manic. Meredith, oh my God, I have the most amazing news. Sophia, are you okay? I've been trying to reach you for— Tyler proposed! Sophia's squeal was so loud that Meredith had to hold the phone away from her ear. Can you believe it? Tyler Richardson proposed. We're getting married. Tyler Richardson. Meredith knew the name, of course. Everyone in Charleston knew the Richardson family. Old money, real estate empire, the kind of wealth that came with its own social obligations and expectations. Tyler was Sophia's on-again, off-again boyfriend of 3 years, a handsome but somewhat shallow man who seemed more interested in Sophia as an accessory than as a person. That's wonderful, Sophia. Congratulations. I know we haven't been talking, but Meredith, I want you to be my maid of honor. You're my sister, and despite everything, I love you. This is too important for us to let some stupid inheritance thing come between us. Meredith felt a wave of relief wash over her. Maybe this was the bridge they needed, the way back to each other. Of course, Sophia. I'd be honored. Oh, this is going to be perfect. Tyler's parents are insisting on a huge wedding. I'm thinking the Charleston Country Club, maybe 300 guests. His mother already has ideas about the flowers and the band. Apparently, they want to fly in some famous chef from New York for the reception. As Sophia chattered on about wedding plans, Meredith felt a familiar uneasiness settling in her stomach. She recognized this tone, this manic excitement. It was the same way Sophia had sounded when she'd maxed out her credit cards during her shopping addiction phase in college, or when she'd impulsively quit her job to become an actress without any training or connections. "Sophia," she said carefully, "that all sounds lovely but expensive. Are you sure? Oh, don't worry about that. Tyler's family has money, and honestly, after everything that's happened, I think we deserve something special. Life's too short not to celebrate the big moments, you know?" After they hung up, Meredith sat in her grandmother's kitchen, staring out at the garden where Eleanor had grown prize-winning roses for 40 years. Something felt off about the conversation, but she couldn't put her finger on what. Maybe it was just her own guilt talking. After all, she was the one who'd inherited a fortune in jewelry while Sophia got half of a modest house and savings account. Maybe Sophia deserved her fairy tale wedding. Maybe this was exactly what they needed to heal the rift between them. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks later when Meredith received a call from her bank. "Miss Campbell, this is Janet Morrison from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding your safety deposit box access records." Meredith frowned, cradling the phone against her shoulder as she finished grading papers at her kitchen table. "I'm sorry, what about my access records?" "Well, according to our system, you visited your box yesterday around 2:30 p.m. I just wanted to confirm this was you, as we've had some unusual activity reports lately." "Yesterday at 2:30? Meredith's stomach dropped. "Janet, I was at work yesterday until 6 p.m. I have 30 witnesses. I was supervising after-school tutoring at Lincoln Elementary." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Miss Campbell, I think you need to come in immediately." Meredith's hands were shaking as she drove to the bank. The impossible scenarios racing through her mind seemed like something out of a crime drama. Identity theft, bank robbery, some elaborate heist involving her grandmother's jewelry. But when she met with Janet Morrison, a kind woman in her 50s who'd helped Meredith set up the safety deposit box, the reality was somehow worse. "The person who accessed your box had proper identification," Janet explained, pulling up security footage on her computer. "Driver's license, key, everything appeared to be in order. But now that I'm looking at this footage compared to you sitting here..." Meredith stared at the grainy black and white image on the screen. The woman in the footage was blonde, like her, and approximately the same height and build. But it wasn't her. It was Sophia. "How is this possible?" Meredith whispered. "How did she get my key, my ID?" Janet's expression was grave. "Miss Campbell, I'm afraid this appears to be a case of identity fraud. We'll need to contact the police immediately, and I have to ask, do you still have your safety deposit box key?" Meredith fumbled through her purse, her heart racing. The key was exactly where it should be, attached to her main keychain. "It's here." "I don't understand how..." "Duplicate keys can be made," Janet said softly. "And with today's technology, fake IDs are unfortunately not that difficult to obtain, especially when the person making the fake ID has access to your personal information." The next few hours passed in a blur of police reports, paperwork, and devastating confirmations. When they finally opened Meredith's safety deposit box, it was completely empty. Every single piece of her grandmother's jewelry collection was gone. The Victorian emerald necklace, the Art Deco diamond bracelet, the sapphire earrings, even the simple gold wedding band that had belonged to her great-great-grandmother. $300,000 worth of family history, gone. Detective Maria Santos, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, interviewed Meredith at the police station. "Miss Campbell, I have to ask, do you suspect your sister might be involved in this theft?" Meredith wanted to say no. Every fiber of her being wanted to defend Sophia, to insist that her sister might be dramatic and impulsive, but she would never steal from family. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. I don't know," she whispered. "The person in the footage, it looked like her, but I can't imagine why she would..." She stopped, remembering Sophia's manic excitement about the wedding, her casual dismissal of the enormous costs involved. "Has your sister been experiencing any financial difficulties lately? Detective Santos asked gently. Not that I know of, but she's planning this huge wedding, and she's always been impulsive with money. Over the next few days, Meredith tried desperately to reach Sophia. Her calls went straight to voicemail, her texts were ignored, and when she showed up at Sophia's apartment, Kelly answered the door with an uncomfortable expression. She's not here, Meredith. She said she was going to stay at Tyler's place until the wedding. Kelly, something's happened. Something serious. I really need to talk to her. Kelly bit her lip nervously. She said you might come by. She said to tell you that she's really busy with wedding planning right now, but she'll call you soon. Did she seem different to you recently? Anxious, maybe? Like she was worried about something? Oh, well. Kelly glanced around nervously, as if Sophia might materialize at any moment. She did get some mail that upset her a few weeks ago. Credit card statements, I think. She was crying and making phone calls about payments. But then suddenly everything was fine again. She went out the next day and came back with all these shopping bags, talking about how she'd figured everything out. Meredith's blood ran cold. What day was this? I think it was a Tuesday. Maybe 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago. Right around the time the jewelry had been stolen. That evening, Meredith sat in her grandmother's house, staring at the empty jewelry box. She'd moved back into Eleanor's house temporarily while dealing with the estate, and the familiar surroundings usually brought her comfort. Tonight, they just made her feel more alone. She picked up her phone and called Tyler's number. She'd gotten it from Sophia months ago and never used it until now. Hello? Tyler's voice was cautious, probably because he didn't recognize the number. Tyler, it's Meredith, Sophia's sister. I really need to speak with her. Oh, hey, Meredith. Sophia's not here right now. She's out with the wedding planner, I think. Tyler, can I ask you something? Has Sophia seemed stressed about money lately? About wedding costs? There was a long pause. Why would she be stressed about money? My parents are paying for the wedding. Meredith felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Your parents are paying? But Sophia said, well, they're paying for most of it. The venue, the band, the flowers. Sophia wanted to contribute something herself, for pride reasons. She said she wanted to pay for the catering and the photographer. Why? The catering and photographer. Meredith did quick mental math for a 300-person wedding at the Charleston Country Club that would easily be $40,000 or $50,000. Money that Sophia definitely didn't have. Tyler, she said carefully, has Sophia shown you any expensive jewelry lately? Maybe talking about selling some family pieces? Funny you should ask that. Yeah, she had this amazing necklace last week. Emeralds, looked like something from a movie. She said it was from your grandmother's collection, that you were letting her borrow it for the engagement party. Why? Meredith closed her eyes, feeling sick. What engagement party? The one next weekend at the yacht club. Sophia's been planning it for weeks. She invited like 100 people, hired a string quartet, the whole 9 yards. After they hung up, Meredith sat in the growing darkness, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Sophia had stolen the jewelry, probably planning to sell just enough to pay for her portion of the wedding and the engagement party. She'd used the emerald necklace as a prop, maybe thinking she could return it before Meredith noticed it was missing. But something had gone wrong. Maybe the buyer had wanted the whole collection. Maybe Sophia had panicked and sold everything. Or maybe the taste of easy money had been too tempting to resist. The next morning, Meredith drove to the jewelry district downtown, armed with photos of her grandmother's pieces and a sick certainty about what she would find. The third shop she visited, an upscale establishment called Heritage Fine Jewelry, was exactly what she'd been dreading. Oh, yes, the owner, a distinguished man named Mr. Goldberg, said immediately when she showed him the photos. These pieces, beautiful collection. The young woman who brought them in said they were family pieces she needed to liquidate quickly. Do you remember what she looked like? Blonde, very attractive, well-dressed. She had proper documentation, ownership papers, insurance appraisals, the works. Said her grandmother had recently passed and she needed to sell for estate purposes. Did she sell the entire collection? Mr. Goldberg nodded gravely. I paid her $180,000 for the lot. I would have paid more, but she seemed eager to close the deal quickly. I got the impression she needed the money urgently. $180,000. Sophia had sold a $300,000 collection for $180,000. probably because she needed cash fast and couldn't wait for a proper auction. "Sir," Meredith said, her voice shaking, "those pieces were stolen from me. I have a police report and—" "Oh dear," Mr. Goldberg's face went pale. "Oh, my dear girl, I had no idea." The documentation looked completely legitimate. He immediately called his lawyer, who confirmed what Meredith had feared. While Mr. Goldberg had acted in good faith, recovering the jewelry would be a complex legal process that could take months or years, assuming the pieces hadn't already been resold. That afternoon, Meredith finally confronted Sophia at Tyler's family estate. She waited outside the gates until Sophia's car appeared, then followed her up the long driveway. "Meredith." Sophia's smile was bright and false as she got out of her BMW. "What a surprise." "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Sophia. About Grandma Eleanor's jewelry." Something flickered across Sophia's face. Guilt, fear, defiance. "I don't know what you mean. I know you stole them. I have security footage from the bank, and I found where you sold them." Sophia's mask finally slipped. For a moment, her face showed raw panic, then calculation, then a kind of desperate fury. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said, but her voice was shaking. "And even if I did borrow some pieces, it's not like you were using them. They were just sitting in that box, collecting dust, while I'm trying to plan the wedding of the century." "Borrow?" "Sophia, you sold them." "All of them. $300,000 worth of family history, gone." "Don't be so dramatic. They're just things, Meredith. Rocks and metal. Grandma Eleanor is dead. She doesn't care what happens to them now." The callousness of it took Meredith's breath away. "Those weren't just things. They were our family's legacy. 4 generations of—" "Oh, spare me the sentimental garbage." Sophia's voice rose to a near shriek. "You got the jewelry, you got the bigger inheritance, you got everything, as usual. Perfect little Meredith, everyone's favorite. Well, guess what? I needed that money and I took it. Sue me." "I am going to sue you," Meredith said quietly, "and I'm going to have you arrested for theft and fraud." Sophia laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "Good luck proving anything. You think Tyler's family lawyers can't handle some small-town police investigation? You think anyone's going to believe that I would steal from my own sister?" She turned and walked toward the house, then stopped and looked back. "Besides, Meredith, even if you could prove something, which you can't, what's done is done. The jewelry is sold, the money is spent. In 2 weeks, I'm going to have the wedding of my dreams, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." As Meredith drove home, she realized that her sister was probably right about one thing. The legal system moved slowly, and by the time any charges were filed or lawsuits resolved, Sophia's wedding would be over and the money would be gone. But maybe there was another way to get justice. The business card felt heavy in Meredith's hand as she sat in the parking lot of Whitman and Associates, one of Charleston's most prestigious law firms. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights researching attorneys, reading reviews, and gathering every piece of evidence she could find. The police investigation was moving at a glacial pace, and Detective Santos had warned her that even with the security footage and witness testimony, proving identity theft and fraud beyond a reasonable doubt would be challenging. But Thomas Whitman had a different reputation. He was known for taking on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch, for being creative with legal strategies, and for never backing down from a fight. His consultation fee alone was more than Meredith made in a week, but she was past caring about the cost. "Miss Campbell," Whitman said as she entered his office. He was a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. "I've reviewed the materials you sent over. This is quite a complex situation. Can you help me?" Meredith asked directly. "Can you get my grandmother's jewelry back?" Whitman leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "The criminal case will take months, possibly years. Your sister's lawyers will delay, file motions, challenge evidence. Even if she's eventually convicted, recovering the actual jewelry pieces will be nearly impossible. They've likely been resold, possibly multiple times." Meredith's heart sank. "So there's nothing I can do?" "I didn't say that." Whitman's eyes gleamed with something that looked like anticipation. "There's another approach. A civil case, filed immediately, with a request for emergency injunctive relief. We can freeze her assets, put liens on property, and most importantly, we can move fast." "How fast?" "If we file tomorrow, we could have a court order by Friday. The wedding is next Saturday, correct? Meredith nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Here's what I propose, Whitman continued, pulling out a yellow legal pad. We file a civil suit for conversion, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We demand full restitution, not just the $180,000 she received, but the full $300,000 value of the collection, plus punitive damages. And we ask for an emergency order freezing all of her assets pending resolution. What does that mean exactly? It means she can't spend another dime without court approval. Her bank accounts, her credit cards, any money she has access to, all frozen, including, presumably, whatever funds she's set aside to pay the caterer. The implications hit Meredith like a wave. The wedding would be significantly impacted, yes. I imagine it's difficult to host a reception without food. Meredith stared out the window at Charleston's historic district, thinking about Sophia's words. In 2 weeks, I'm going to have the wedding of my dreams, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Mr. Whitman, she said finally, what are the chances of success? With the evidence you've gathered? Very good. The bank security footage alone is damning, and we have the jewelry dealer's testimony about the forged ownership documents. Your sister made several critical mistakes. And the timing? Like I said, if we move fast, we could have that court order by Friday. The caterer would probably need payment authorization by Saturday morning at the latest. Meredith closed her eyes, thinking about her grandmother's voice reading that letter in the lawyer's office. She will understand their true worth, not just their monetary value, but their emotional significance. She thought about 4 generations of strong women who had faced difficult choices and found the courage to do what was right. Do it, she said. The next 3 days passed in a blur of legal activity. Whitman's team worked with military precision, filing motions, serving papers, and gathering additional evidence. Meredith found herself caught between guilt and determination, between her lifelong role as the peacekeeper and her growing anger at the magnitude of Sophia's betrayal. On Wednesday, she received a furious phone call from Tyler. Meredith, what the hell is going on? Sophia's hysterical. She says you're trying to ruin her wedding? Tyler, did she tell you what she did? About the jewelry? She said there was some misunderstanding about insurance or something. Look, can't this wait until after the wedding? She's under enough stress as it is. She stole $300,000 worth of family heirlooms and sold them to pay for catering, Meredith said bluntly. There's no misunderstanding. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. 300,000? Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. The emerald necklace you saw her wearing? It belonged to my great-great-grandmother. The money she used to pay for your engagement party? It came from selling jewelry that had been in our family for 4 generations. Jesus Christ, Sophia. What did you do? Thursday brought more angry calls, from Sophia's friends, from Tyler's mother, even from Kelly, Sophia's roommate. Meredith, I don't understand what's happening, Kelly said, crying. Sophia came home today and just started throwing things and screaming about lawyers and court orders. She says you're trying to destroy her life. Kelly, she stole from me. She committed fraud. I'm just trying to get justice. But the wedding is in 2 days. Couldn't you have waited? That was the question that kept Meredith awake Thursday night. Could she have waited? Should she have found another way? Some path that didn't involve destroying Sophia's wedding day? She thought about her grandmother's funeral, how Sophia had stood beside her at the graveside, both of them crying as they said goodbye to the woman who had raised them. She thought about all the times Sophia had called her in tears over the years, bad breakups, job troubles, money problems, and how Meredith had always been there to help, to comfort, to fix whatever was broken. But then she thought about Sophia's face when she'd admitted to the theft, the callous dismissal of generations of family history as just things. She thought about the cold calculation in her sister's voice when she'd said, "What's done is done." At 2 a.m., her phone rang. It was Sophia, and she was sobbing. "Meredith, please, I'm begging you. Call off the lawyers. I'll pay you back, I promise. I'll get the money somehow." "How, Sophia? You already spent it?" "I don't know, but I'll figure it out. Please, you can't do this. Tyler's family is asking questions. His mother is talking about postponing the wedding. This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and you're ruining it." "I didn't ruin it, Sophia. You did when you decided to steal from your own family. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Sophia's voice rose to a wail. I was only going to sell a few pieces, just enough for the catering. But the dealer said he wanted the whole collection, and he offered so much money, and I had all these bills. What bills? Credit cards. I owed almost $60,000 on credit cards. Shopping, traveling with Tyler, trying to keep up with his lifestyle. I was drowning, Meredith. I didn't know what else to do. For a moment, Meredith felt her resolve waver. This was her little sister, the girl she'd helped raise after their parents died, the person she'd protected and cared for her entire life. But then Sophia's tone changed, becoming calculating and manipulative in a way that was all too familiar. Look, the money's gone, okay? Even if you win this lawsuit, you'll never see those jewelry pieces again. But if you drop this now, I promise I'll make it right somehow. We can work out a payment plan, and you can still be my maid of honor. We can still be sisters. We'll always be sisters, Sophia. But that doesn't mean I have to let you steal from me. Fine, Sophia's voice turned cold. But just remember, when you're sitting alone in Grandma's house with no family left, that this was your choice. You chose some old jewelry over your own sister. She hung up, leaving Meredith staring at the phone in the darkness. Friday morning brought the call Meredith had been waiting for. Miss Campbell, this is Thomas Whitman. Judge Harrison has granted our motion. As of 10 a.m. this morning, all of your sister's assets are frozen pending resolution of the case. All of them? Bank accounts, credit cards, investment accounts, everything we could identify. She can't spend money on anything beyond basic necessities without court approval. And the caterer? I took the liberty of calling Prestige Catering this morning. They confirmed that they require full payment by 5 p.m. today, or they cannot provide service tomorrow. Unless your sister can convince a judge to release funds specifically for that purpose, which seems unlikely given the circumstances, there will be no food at her wedding reception. Meredith closed her eyes, imagining Sophia's face when she got the news. 300 guests, Charleston's social elite, gathering at the country club for a reception with no food, no bar service, nothing but empty tables and the echoes of what should have been a fairy tale celebration. Miss Campbell? Are you having second thoughts? Meredith opened her eyes and looked around her grandmother's kitchen, at the empty space where the jewelry box used to sit, at the photographs on the wall showing 4 generations of strong women who had faced their own difficult choices. No, she said firmly, no second thoughts. That afternoon, as she sat in her car outside the Charleston Country Club, Meredith watched a parade of vendors arriving for tomorrow's setup, florists, musicians, lighting technicians. But notably absent were the catering trucks that should have been delivering tables, linens, and tomorrow's feast. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. We need to talk. She met him at a coffee shop downtown, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. Is it true? He asked without preamble. All of it? The theft, the forged documents, the amount of money? Yes. Tyler buried his face in his hands. My mother is beside herself. She's talking about calling off the wedding entirely. The social humiliation. Having 300 guests show up to a reception with no food. Tyler, I'm sorry. I really am. But what would you have done? If someone stole from you, if your own sister betrayed you like this? He looked up at her with exhausted eyes. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But Meredith, she's falling apart. She's been locked in her room all day crying. She won't talk to anyone, won't answer her phone. I'm genuinely worried about her. For a moment, Meredith felt the familiar urge to fix things, to smooth over the crisis and take care of her little sister. But then she remembered Sophia's voice on the phone. You chose some old jewelry over your own sister. I didn't choose jewelry over family, Tyler. I chose justice over enabling. There's a difference. As she drove home that evening, Meredith's phone rang constantly. Friends, relatives, even people she barely knew, all wanting to know if the rumors were true, if she had really destroyed her sister's wedding over some old jewelry. Each call reinforced her conviction that she'd made the right choice. Because that's how everyone saw it, as a petty squabble over material possessions, not as a fundamental betrayal of trust and family history. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect Charleston day that wedding planners dream about. Meredith woke early in her grandmother's house, her stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. In a few hours, 300 of Charleston's most prominent citizens would gather at the country club for what they expected to be the social event of the season. Instead, they were about to witness the most spectacular wedding disaster in the city's recent memory. At 8 a.m., her phone began ringing. The first call was from Mrs. Richardson, Tyler's mother, and her voice was shaking with barely controlled fury. "Meredith Campbell, I don't know what kind of family you people are, but this vendetta of yours has gone too far. Do you have any idea what you've done? The humiliation you've brought on both our families? Mrs. Richardson, I understand you're upset. Upset? My dear, upset doesn't begin to cover it. We have the governor of South Carolina coming to this wedding. We have senators, judges, business leaders from across the Southeast. And now we have to tell them that there will be no reception because the bride is apparently a common thief." The word thief hung in the air between them, harsh and undeniable. "I didn't make Sophia steal from me," Meredith said quietly. "I just refused to pretend it didn't happen." "Well, I hope your precious jewelry was worth destroying your sister's life, because that's what you've done, you know. Tyler is having serious second thoughts about this entire marriage." After Mrs. Richardson hung up, the calls came in waves. Sophia's friends, wedding guests, even the florist and musicians, all wanting to know what was happening, whether the wedding was still on, whether the reception would actually take place. At 10 a.m., Detective Santos called with an update on the criminal case. "Miss Campbell, I wanted to let you know that the district attorney's office is moving forward with charges. Grand theft, identity fraud, forgery. Your sister is looking at serious prison time if convicted." "How serious?" 5 to 10 years, potentially. The dollar amount puts this in felony territory, and the sophisticated nature of the fraud, the fake ID, the forged documents, makes it worse. Prison time. Meredith closed her eyes, imagining Sophia in an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly manicured nails chipped and broken, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. For a moment, she almost called Thomas Whitman to ask if there was still time to drop the charges. But then she remembered the empty jewelry box, the generations of family history that Sophia had casually dismissed as just things, and her resolve hardened again. At noon, she drove to the Charleston Country Club, not because she wanted to witness Sophia's humiliation, but because she needed to see this through. She needed to face the consequences of her decision, whatever they might be. The country club's parking lot was already filling with luxury cars. Mercedes, BMWs, the occasional Rolls-Royce. Wedding guests in designer dresses and expensive suits were making their way toward the chapel, chattering excitedly about the ceremony they were about to witness. Meredith parked at the far edge of the lot and walked toward the building, feeling like an intruder at her own sister's wedding. She was wearing a simple blue dress. She'd returned the maid of honor gown to the bridal shop 3 days ago, and she felt underdressed among Charleston's social elite. Inside the chapel, the ceremony was about to begin. The space was stunning, white roses and baby's breath everywhere, soft lighting, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. Tyler stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but his face was pale and strained. Then the wedding march began, and Sophia appeared at the back of the chapel. Even under the circumstances, she was breathtaking. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, her veil a cloud of antique tulle that had belonged to Tyler's grandmother. Her makeup was flawless, her smile radiant, and for a moment it was possible to believe that this was just another fairy tale wedding in Charleston's long tradition of fairy tale weddings. But Meredith could see the cracks in the facade. Sophia's hands were shaking as she held her bouquet. Her smile was too bright, too forced. And when her eyes found Meredith in the congregation, the look she gave her was pure, undiluted hatred. The ceremony itself was beautiful and brief. Tyler's voice cracked slightly when he said his vows, and Sophia's "I do" was barely audible. But they were pronounced husband and wife, they kissed, and 300 guests rose to applaud as they walked back down the aisle. It was during the receiving line that the first signs of trouble became apparent. "Sophia, darling," said Mrs. Pemberton, one of Charleston's most prominent socialites, "we're all so excited for the reception." "I heard you hired that wonderful chef from New York?" Sophia's smile flickered. "Oh yes, it's going to be wonderful." "And the open bar with those specialty cocktails?" I can't wait to try that signature drink you were telling me about. Yes, the cocktails. Sophia's voice trailed off, and she looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. Tyler stepped in smoothly. We're so glad you could be here to celebrate with us, Mrs. Pemberton. We'll see you at the reception. But as the receiving line continued, the questions kept coming. Guests wanted to know about the menu, the wine selection, the famous band that was supposed to perform. Each question seemed to drain a little more color from Sophia's face. Finally, the last guest passed through the line, and the wedding party began making their way toward the ballroom for the reception. Meredith hung back, watching from a distance as 300 people dressed in their finest clothes streamed toward what they expected to be an elaborate celebration. The ballroom itself was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers cast romantic lighting over dozens of round tables draped in ivory linens. Centerpieces of white orchids and roses created a garden atmosphere, and a parquet dance floor gleamed in the center of the room. But the tables were empty. No place settings, no glasses, no silverware. No serving stations along the walls, no bar setup, no signs of the elaborate feast that guests had been anticipating for weeks. The silence when the first guests entered the ballroom was deafening. I don't understand, Meredith heard someone whisper. Where's the food? Maybe they're setting up still? But it's already 2 p.m. Tyler's father, a distinguished man who owned half the real estate in downtown Charleston, was having a heated conversation with the country club's manager near the entrance. What do you mean there's no catering service? We've been planning this for months. Sir, I'm very sorry, but Prestige Catering called this morning to say their contract had been canceled due to non-payment. They were supposed to provide all food and beverage service. Non-payment? That's impossible. My son's wedding... I'm afraid I don't have any other information, sir. As word spread through the crowd, the atmosphere in the ballroom began to shift. Confused murmurs grew louder. Elegant guests began checking their watches and looking around for explanations that didn't come. Sophia stood near the head table with Tyler, her wedding dress suddenly seeming less like a fairy tale gown and more like a costume for a performance that was falling apart. Her face had gone from pale to gray, and she was clutching Tyler's arm so tightly that her knuckles were white. Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler finally stepped forward, his voice carrying across the ballroom. I'm afraid we've encountered some unexpected logistical issues with the catering service. We're working to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that there was no resolution coming. The country club's regular restaurant was closed for renovations. There were no backup caterers available on such short notice, and 300 hungry, confused, and increasingly irritated guests were trapped in a beautiful ballroom with nothing to eat or drink. Mrs. Governor Williams, a formidable woman in her 70s, approached Tyler's mother with the kind of expression that had withered lesser mortals. Margaret, dear, I'm afraid I don't understand what's happening here. Are we expected to stand around this empty ballroom all afternoon? I'm so sorry, Patricia. There seems to have been some miscommunication with the vendors. Miscommunication? Mrs. Williams' voice could have cut glass. I've been to 1,000 weddings in my lifetime, and I've never seen anything like this. It's unprecedented. That was the word that began spreading through the crowd. Unprecedented. Charleston's social elite prided themselves on their breeding, their manners, their ability to handle any social situation with grace and aplomb. But no one had ever taught them how to react to a reception with no reception. Some guests began making quiet exits, murmuring apologies about prior commitments and unexpected obligations. Others clustered in small groups, their voices growing louder as they speculated about what could have gone so wrong. I heard there were legal problems, someone whispered. Family drama of some sort. Something about stolen jewelry? Meredith watched from the back of the ballroom as her sister's fairy tale wedding disintegrated in real time. Part of her felt vindicated. Justice was being served, consequences were being faced. But a larger part of her felt sick with guilt and sadness. This was her baby sister, the girl she'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and comforted through every crisis of her young life. And now she was watching that same girl's dreams crumble in the most public way possible. Sophia seemed to sense her presence and turned, their eyes meeting across the crowded ballroom. For a moment, all the anger and betrayal fell away, and they were just two sisters who had lost their way. Then Sophia's face hardened, and she walked directly toward Meredith with the determined stride of someone who had finally decided to stop running from the consequences of her actions. "Are you happy now?" she said when she reached Meredith, her voice low and venomous. "Is this what you wanted? To destroy my wedding day?" "I wanted my grandmother's jewelry back," Meredith replied quietly. "This was never about your wedding. Bullshit. You could have waited. You could have filed your lawsuit next week, next month. But you chose to do it now, right before my wedding, because you wanted to hurt me." Around them, the conversation in the ballroom was growing louder as more guests realized that no food was coming, no drinks were being served, and they had dressed up and driven across the city for what was essentially an empty party. "You hurt yourself, Sophia, the moment you decided to steal from your own family." "Family." Sophia laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about family? Family doesn't destroy each other over jewelry. Family forgives. Family finds a way to work things out. Family also doesn't commit fraud and theft. Those pieces were just sitting in a bank vault. You never wore them, never even looked at them. What good were they doing anyone? They were my inheritance. My connection to 4 generations of women who worked and sacrificed and built something to pass down to their daughters. You stole that history, Sophia. You sold it like it was nothing more than a commodity." Their voices had risen enough to attract attention from nearby guests, who were now openly staring at the confrontation between the bride and her estranged sister. "I was drowning," Sophia's voice cracked. "I had debts, obligations, a wedding to pay for. I was desperate, and you were sitting there with $300,000 worth of jewelry you never even touched. So you decided to help yourself? I decided to survive. And yes, maybe I made some mistakes. Maybe I should have asked you first. But this—" She gestured around the empty ballroom. "This is cruel. This is vindictive. This is you punishing me in the most humiliating way possible." Tyler appeared at Sophia's side, his face grim. "Sophia, we need to go. People are starting to leave and the photographers are asking questions." But Sophia wasn't finished. "You know what the worst part is, Meredith? Grandma Eleanor would be ashamed of you. She always said family came first, that we had to take care of each other, and you've thrown that away for some old jewelry." "Grandma Eleanor would be ashamed of the person who stole family heirlooms to pay for a party," Meredith shot back. "She would be ashamed of someone who cared more about impressing strangers than honoring the people who came before us." The words hung between them like a physical blow. Sophia's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 8-year-old girl who had cried in Meredith's arms the night their parents died. But then she straightened, her expression hardening into something cold and final. "I will never forgive you for this," she said. "Never." She turned and walked away, Tyler trailing behind her, leaving Meredith standing alone in a ballroom full of confused, hungry, and increasingly angry wedding guests. Within an hour, the ballroom was empty except for the cleaning staff and the abandoned centerpieces that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. The wedding of the season had become the disaster of the decade, and Charleston's social media was already buzzing with photos and speculation about what had gone wrong. 3 months after the wedding disaster, Meredith sat in Thomas Whitman's office, reviewing the final settlement agreement. The civil case had been resolved faster than anyone expected, faced with overwhelming evidence and mounting legal fees. Sophia had agreed to a comprehensive settlement rather than drag the case through years of litigation. "She's agreed to full restitution," Whitman explained, sliding the documents across his mahogany desk. $300,000 for the jewelry's appraised value, plus $50,000 in punitive damages and legal fees. The payments will come from the sale of her condo and Tyler's contribution to resolve the matter quietly. Meredith stared at the numbers on the page, but they felt abstract, meaningless. "What about the actual jewelry pieces?" "I'm afraid that's more complicated. We've managed to recover about 40% of the collection through our investigators. Some pieces hadn't been resold yet, others we tracked down through auction houses and private collectors. But the rest?" He shrugged apologetically. Gone forever, I'm afraid. Meredith nodded, having expected as much. At least she had recovered her great-great-grandmother's emerald necklace, the piece that had started it all, along with several other important family pieces. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And the criminal case? Your sister pled guilty to felony theft and fraud. She received 5 years probation, community service, and restitution. No jail time, thanks to Tyler's family's connections and the fact that she's making full financial amends. No jail time. Meredith wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her had wanted Sophia to face real consequences, to understand the gravity of what she'd done. But another part, the part that still remembered teaching a 5-year-old Sophia how to tie her shoes, was relieved. There is one more thing, Whitman said carefully. Your sister's marriage. What about it? It's over. Tyler filed for divorce 6 weeks ago. Apparently, the social embarrassment was too much for the Richardson family to bear, and Tyler discovered that the theft wasn't an isolated incident. Your sister had been stealing from him as well, using his credit cards, forging his signature on checks. Meredith closed her eyes, feeling a familiar mixture of sadness and inevitability. Of course, there had been more. There always was with Sophia. Where is she now? Living with a friend, I believe. Working as a hostess at a restaurant downtown. The divorce settlement left her with very little. Tyler's family made sure of that. As Meredith drove home through Charleston's historic district, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The city looked the same antebellum mansions, the same moss-draped oak trees, the same tourists taking carriage rides through cobblestone streets. But her place in it felt completely different. She was no longer the quiet social worker who avoided conflict and kept family secrets. She was the woman who had destroyed Charleston's wedding of the season, who had brought down one of the city's most prominent young couples, who had chosen justice over family harmony. The social consequences had been significant. Many of the friends she and Sophia had shared growing up had taken sides, and most had chosen Sophia. Meredith found herself excluded from parties, crossed off invitation lists, whispered about in grocery stores and coffee shops. She could have handled it differently, she'd overheard Mrs. Patterson saying at the farmer's market. There are ways to deal with family problems without airing your dirty laundry in public. That poor girl, someone else had replied. Imagine destroying your own sister's wedding over some old jewelry. Some old jewelry. The phrase that seemed to follow her everywhere, reducing 4 generations of family history to a trivial dispute over material possessions. But there had been unexpected support as well. Detective Santos had called to tell her about other cases where her courage in prosecuting had encouraged victims to come forward. Several women had reached out to share their own stories of family members who had stolen from them, thanking her for showing that theft was theft, regardless of blood relationships. You gave me the courage to file charges against my own brother, one woman had written. For years I told myself that family loyalty meant letting him get away with stealing from our mother's estate. Your case showed me that real family loyalty means holding each other accountable. Now, 6 months later, Meredith was slowly building a new life. She'd moved permanently into her grandmother's house, turning one of the spare bedrooms into a home office where she saw private therapy clients in addition to her work at the school district. The jewelry collection, what remained of it, was back in the old mahogany box, but she'd started wearing some of the pieces. Not often, but for special occasions, honoring her grandmother's memory by letting the jewelry see daylight again. She'd also started volunteering with a nonprofit that helped families deal with financial fraud, sharing her story and providing support for others navigating similar betrayals. It was painful work, but meaningful in a way that helped justify the cost of her choices. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday evening in November, almost exactly a year after her grandmother's death. Meredith was grading papers when she saw Sophia's name on the caller ID. She stared at the phone for 3 rings before finally answering. Hello, Sophia. Meredith. Her sister's voice was different, quieter, less certain than Meredith had ever heard it. I was wondering if we could talk. About what? About everything. About what I did, about the wedding, about us. Meredith looked around her grandmother's kitchen, at the photos on the wall showing generations of family history at the empty chair where Eleanor used to sit and shell peas while telling stories about their ancestors. "Okay," she said finally. "We can talk." They met at a small cafe near the college, neutral territory where neither of them had memories or baggage. Sophia looked different, thinner, older, wearing clothes that were nice but not designer. Her hair was shorter, her makeup more subdued. She looked like someone who had learned the difference between wanting things and needing them. "Thank you for seeing me," Sophia said when they'd ordered coffee. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." They sat in silence for a moment, two sisters who had once shared everything now struggling to find words for the chasm between them. "I've been going to therapy," Sophia said finally. "Court ordered at first, but I kept going after my probation officer said I could stop. I needed to understand. I needed to figure out how I became the kind of person who could steal from her own family." "And what did you figure out?" Sophia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring down at the dark liquid. "That I was angry. I had been angry for years, maybe since we were kids, and I never even realized it. Angry that you were the responsible one, the one everyone trusted, the one Grandma Eleanor really loved. Angry that things came so easily to you, school, relationships, people's respect. Angry that I always felt like I was performing, trying to be enough, and you just, I were enough." Meredith felt her throat tighten. "Sophia, let me finish, please." Sophia looked up, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "When Grandma Eleanor left you the jewelry, it felt like confirmation of everything I'd always suspected. That I was the lesser granddaughter, the one who wasn't quite worthy of the family legacy. So I took it. I told myself I was just borrowing it, that I deserved it as much as you did, but really, I think I wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt." "You did hurt me," Meredith said quietly. "More than I think you know." "I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Meredith. Not just for the jewelry, but for all of it. For the lies, for the manipulation, for the way I tried to make you the villain when you were just trying to get justice." Meredith studied her sister's face, looking for signs of the old manipulation, the calculated tears and practiced apologies that had worked so many times before. But this felt different. This felt real. "What do you want, Sophia? Why are we here?" "I want to know if there's any possibility of us being sisters again someday." "Not right now. I know it's too soon, and I know I have to earn back your trust. But someday, maybe." Meredith thought about her grandmother's voice, reading that letter in the lawyer's office. She will understand their true worth, not just their monetary value, but their emotional significance. The emotional significance wasn't just in the jewelry itself, but in what it represented: family, legacy, the bonds between generations. And family wasn't just about blood. It was about choice, about the daily decision to love and support and sometimes hold accountable the people who mattered most. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I want to say yes, but I don't trust you yet. And I don't know if I ever will completely." "I understand. But," Meredith took a deep breath, "but I'm willing to try, slowly, with boundaries. And with the understanding that if you ever lie to me again, if you ever steal or manipulate or betray my trust again, it's over permanently." Sophia nodded, tears finally spilling over. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." "It's not about what you deserve," Meredith said. "It's about what I choose to do with the rest of my life. I can carry this anger forever, or I can try to find a way forward." They talked for another hour, carefully navigating the boundaries of their new relationship. Sophia told her about her job at the restaurant, about the tiny apartment she shared with a roommate, about the humbling experience of learning to live within her means. Meredith talked about her work, about the house, about the strange experience of becoming a cautionary tale in Charleston's social circles. "Do you regret it?" Sophia asked as they prepared to leave. "Filing the lawsuit, freezing my assets, ruining the wedding? Do you ever wish you'd handled it differently?" Meredith considered the question carefully. "I regret that it came to that. I regret that you put me in a position where I had to choose between family loyalty and justice. But no, I don't regret holding you accountable. I think Grandma Eleanor would have approved, even though it meant destroying my wedding." "Sophia, you destroyed your own wedding the moment you decided to pay for it with stolen money. I just made sure there were consequences. As they stood outside the cafe, Sophia hesitated. "Can I ask you something? Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me completely?" Meredith looked at her sister, really looked at her, seeing not the manipulative woman who had stolen from her, but the scared little girl who had crawled into her bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who had called her crying over failed relationships, the young woman who had stood beside her at their grandmother's funeral. "I think forgiveness is a process, not a destination," she said finally. "I'm working on it." Over the following months, they began the slow work of rebuilding. Coffee meetings every few weeks, careful phone conversations, the gradual establishment of trust. Sophia kept her word. No lies, no manipulation, no asking for money or favors. She was learning to be responsible for her own life, to face consequences without expecting someone else to fix her problems. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when Meredith's anger flared again, times when Sophia's old patterns of thinking crept back in. But they kept working at it, two sisters learning how to be family again in a way that honored both justice and forgiveness. 2 years after the disastrous wedding, Meredith received a package in the mail with Sophia's return address. Inside was a small jewelry box, and inside that was a simple silver locket that had belonged to their mother. The note was brief. "I found this in some of my old things. I thought you should have it. It's not worth much money, but I know it would mean something to you. Love, Sophia." Meredith opened the locket and found tiny photos of their parents, young and smiling, taken shortly after their wedding. She remembered their mother wearing this locket every day, the way it caught the light when she bent down to kiss them goodnight. She called Sophia that evening. "Thank you for the locket. It means everything to me. I'm glad. I almost kept it, but I realized that wasn't who I want to be anymore." "Sophia? Yeah? I love you too." It was the first time either of them had said those words since the wedding disaster, and they both cried a little as they hung up. That night, Meredith sat in her grandmother's kitchen, wearing her mother's locket and looking through old photo albums. Pictures of holidays, birthdays, ordinary moments made precious by time and loss. 4 generations of women who had faced their own challenges, made their own difficult choices, loved and fought, and forgiven their way through the complexities of family life. She thought about the jewelry collection, locked safely in the bank vault, but no longer hidden away. She'd been wearing pieces more often, honoring her grandmother's memory by letting the family treasures be part of her daily life, rather than museum pieces gathering dust. She thought about Sophia, working late at the restaurant, learning to support herself, slowly earning back the trust and respect she had lost. It would take years, maybe decades, but they were both committed to the process. She thought about the price of justice, the cost of holding family accountable, the difference between enabling and loving. It wasn't a simple calculation. There were no clear winners or losers, just people trying to find their way back to each other after betrayal and pain. But as she looked around her grandmother's kitchen, at the photos and memories and evidence of generations of resilient women, Meredith knew she had made the right choices. She had honored her ancestors by refusing to let their legacy be stolen. She had honored her own integrity by choosing justice over convenience. And she was honoring the possibility of redemption by giving Sophia a chance to earn forgiveness. The emerald necklace was safe in the vault, but the real family treasures, love, forgiveness, the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult, those were treasures that could never be stolen. Outside, Charleston continued its ancient rhythms. Tourists taking carriage rides, couples getting married in historic churches, families gathering for Sunday dinners. And in a kitchen full of memories and possibilities, a woman who had learned the true value of both justice and mercy smiled and turned out the lights. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth forgiving. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you discovered that you could honor both without losing your soul.